Education that includes diverse histories and perspectives allows students to understand and appreciate their heritage. It can also lead to building confidence and self-worth. My next guest, Afghan American poet, performer, and educator, Marjan Naderi, embodies this mission through her work. I met Marjan Naderi at our studios in Washington, D.C.
If sister throws the vase, a perfect arc, slicing the air, a comet, trailing in brilliance, shatters against the ground, glass like fallen constellations, splintering across the floor, you freeze.
Let's begin by talking about your craft. I was watching an interview with you, and you were asked about what drew you to poetry, and I want to get this right, so I'm reading this. You said it was a way to document my identity. And then you went on to say a lot of identities I hold are shoved to the back of the closet. And I thought that was really interesting. What did you mean by that?
Well, I am a Muslim woman. I'm an Afghan woman. I'm an American woman. And when you're young, especially as a teenager, which is when that interview was taken, I was questioning identity very deeply. Where do I exist in the world? Where can I express myself entirely? Because in the American classroom, it wasn't really the environment or the warmth of an environment for me to share stories of back home very often, or how I even felt most comfortable. And so after some time, I would notice how my own moments of feeling silence were also mirrored in my mother. I was growing in awareness, observing how the world treats her. And so she's an older lady. Her language and her accent is still thick with like American and Afghan spices finding their own way around. And she also wears a headscarf. And, you know, I could go out into the world and very quickly see how her voice, when she would speak to someone just because they couldn't entirely understand her, would be easily dismissed or passively addressed. And so very quickly, I wanted to offer a world where my language can get into her and her language can get through to me despite the language barriers. And so I had to go into the closet. I had to go into the closet and find all of the secrets and the shadows from my own past. But primarily as a young person, you're carrying both your parents' pasts as well. So you take it from the dead and you work with these shadows and bring them to life through poems. And they become gifts and stories that you can give to others. And so when a narrative is being shoved to the back of the closet, whether it's traditionally in the political sense because I am an Afghan American woman, or merely in the emotional sense when it comes to interpersonal family dynamics and relationships, you gotta find it in the closet and bring it to the light. Yeah.
Also, taking it out of the closet, bringing it into the light, helps to shatter stereotypes in a sense, doesn't it?
In some way, yeah. I mean, I grew up in my public schools wearing a headscarf, and there was something incredibly jarring about being as loud and unapologetic as I was. I mean, I was never taught to close my mouth. Like in Afghanistan, people are always yelling when they want to communicate on the phone, like you're screaming through 10 different rooms just to get to someone on the other line. And so my voice was already incredibly loud, and I was incredibly opinionated as well. Like both of my parents are very stubborn people. So I brought that into a lot of classroom discussions, and I could see how like my teachers would respond, often saying like, oh, it's great that like, you know, your parents haven't told you to like keep too quiet, or like I'm used to my students who wear a headscarf or are from Afghanistan, like their cultural dynamics kind of silence them entirely. And so there is a truth to that. But when it comes to the lived flesh and experience of expressing joy, especially as a Muslim woman, it seemed a bit odd at the time. And so these poems, whether they be joyous or incredibly heartbreaking, because they reach the human core, they penetrate past the veils of our stereotypes and our biases. And then the human is allowed to be human again, no longer a statistic or an animal or something passive, but one that can emote and experience the full range of human life.
Marjan Naderi is a poet, performer, and educator. In 2020, she was honored as the Youth Poet Laureate. Naderi is also a 7-time National Poetry Slam champion, showcasing her exceptional talent. Poetry has to be so succinct but it also still has to hit here and here, right? So are there limitations to it, or does that open things up for you in a sense? I mean, because the words have to be a little bit more sparse, but the messaging's still so strong.
I mean, we're all living in our constructed worlds. It's all interpreted worlds. So my interpreted world meets your interpreted world, and there are these tools of language that connect us in some theoretical way, as if we have a real understanding of what's going on in your world and my world. And when poetry is done right, it can feel like revelation. I mean, spoken oratory poetry is that. And if you take a moment to realize how impressionable we are with every second, that language can find its way into hypnosis and bring you into your attention with me and build this connection. That's really where the truth of life is. It's in love. And so poetry becomes a vehicle for this love to be shared between us, just for a split second.
When did you recognize that you had a voice and something to say and started to write? And what was that like?
Oh, I was in second grade and I wanted to write an ode to my teacher because I loved her so much. So I had written this very weird rhyming poem that said teacher, teacher, your brain is like a factory. That's the only line I remember. But I read it on the morning announcements in second grade. And then time had passed and I was in middle school and I had a teacher who was like, Marjan, you have a unique way of combining words and working with language. You should do this competition. And I was like, I don't know about that. Time had passed. But at that point in my life, there were a few tumultuous events happening. And so the deep feeling of loneliness that every teenager experiences started to creep its way up around then. And so I'm noticing things about myself that make me feel so different around other people. I don't feel as connected or loved or seen. Hormones are going crazy. And I decided, okay, maybe I'll give this competition a shot. And during the time, there were many challenges when it came to expressing the heaviness on my heart. My tongue felt very heavy. And so I rolled myself out of bed after a few months of thinking what this could be about. And I just asked myself to write about whatever was weighing my heart down. And it turned into a poem. I was like, oh, and while I was writing this, there were these beautiful images that would come to me and beautify the pain I had experienced. And I wanted to latch on to that. And I realized that if I continue adjusting the story, but with my own hand in the craft, then how it nestles inside of me changes what I hold inside of me. And so then that's when questions of identity began to pierce about and find its way. But I wrote a few poems. My teachers kept encouraging me. But I would say that most poetry, even today, I find myself writing comes from that quintessential, existential dread of loneliness that all people feel. And when the world is truly terrible, truly dark, the only thing you can do is create something beautiful, like language to gift to another person. And so I fell in love. If there wasn't love or affection that I could find anywhere else in the world, I conjured it with my imagination. And they turned into these bite-sized things that I could offer to others. And then, anger found its way to the page, and passion found its way, and gratitude found its way. And I refined my awareness, I refined my intellect through these small little flashcards of poems. And so for me, that's where poetry was bred out of and continues to evolve into. I know I'm speaking in incredibly large, grandiose terms, but I'm trying to offer you my heart more than a little, analysis of my life.
In second grade, my teacher did roll call every morning. I'd clench my fists as she'd sputter. Marjan Naderi to the broken record of her eyebrows. Now, every time my name is said, my bloodline folds scripts of history.
Marjan's writing was honored by the National Young Arts Foundation and was nominated for the U.S. Presidential Scholar in the Arts Award. Talk to me about themes. If somebody were to ask you, what are your themes? What are some of the themes that you hit? How would you describe that to somebody who's not familiar with your poetry?
Well, I do write a lot about family, like you said, very personal. But outside of family ties, I've been moving more into community orientation and learning how to hold gratitude on a poem, because the skill is very different when you're engaging with heavier grief-stricken language versus hopeful, something to cement for a country or a people. And so it's been ever-changing, but they usually stick around to that personal dynamic of family relationships. Yeah.
And generational trauma, you talk about that as well, don't you?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm at the University of Virginia, and I'm a neuroscience and religious studies student. And so I'm currently working to provide treatment models for Afghan families and practicing meditations so that they have a better security in their own nervous system and regulating their own nervous system with these models. And so often for Afghan people, when they're coming out of trauma, they've come through lineages, grandmothers and grandfathers who have gone through this war, who have carried this pain in their bones. And it's very common for trauma to find its way down the chain, and family models behavior replication. And so wanting to dissect that in the work so that it can undo its complexity, make itself clear enough to be engaged with head on, and then letting that side of things go in the therapeutic process is very helpful. So a lot of patients currently in clinical settings, especially in cognitive-based therapy, are engaging language to better make sense of their world and the world they're in, and that helps a lot with mitigating symptoms of trauma and PTSD.
I want to read you guys a poem from my chapbook Bloodline on page 31.
Her debut chapbook, Bloodline, was released and sold out shortly after its publication. Marjan's poetry is now featured in academic curricula at institutions such as the University of Virginia, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and LMS Voice.
My love is weaved into her DNA. Cradle her. Eyelids flutter into wonderland, wrapped in welcomings to a cold world.
So much of your material, though, I've seen you do some of your poems, it's deeply personal. I know that that's what elicits the reaction from the audience, but is there ever a time where you write something and I'm like, oh, this is just too much. I can't put this out into the world. I mean, do you struggle with any of that?
Growing older, I now understand the value of a public and private life. But when you're in a place where there are no distinctions and everything just feels like chaos, there's not much of a self-protection mechanism. The story is the story. And if you've ever fluctuated in terms of your mental health and you've explored the boundaries of how the human mind can tell itself a story and warp your reality, wanting to be seen when you're deeply in pain as a young person kind of leads you to places of shamelessness. I mean, I'm so unashamed of the life that I've had because I'm proud and still grateful for it. When the heart is flowing, it takes all of that rubbish of life and it brings itself to the forefront. And so I don't hide. I'm strong enough in my own.
You make it seem as though poetry is a freeing exercise. Is that how
Absolutely.
yeah.
Every liberation, every revolution is it's trying to get to the true crux of being free. And to have enough freedom to entirely explore the self, to be entirely unafraid, poetry gives that mechanism. And when you live under a world of oppression or you haven't been able to be entirely expressive, holding on to those pockets become lifelines.
Are you prepared to give us a little medicine? Would you mind hypnotizing us? Is there a poem that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Sure. I would love to read you this first piece. It hurts to flow into language. Pain holds its breath in beauty. Words peel from flesh like petals scorched at the rim, blooming nonetheless, pressing my body into soil, not to root, but to unearth, to loosen the tongue of the buried. And their stories unravel into cursive as the blood beneath skin flows into the hollow of my palm. Calligraphy pools, a river inked with the shape of your name. I carve it out, letter by letter, until the wound swallows sound and syllables shatter to dust. The script uncoils from me, not as loss but as offering, a hymn only the broken can sing. and what remains is nothing but a whisper of ink that stains the soil, waiting to be washed into the dark mouth of time, where language dies and is reborn again as silence.
Can you talk about the moments leading up to writing that? What spurred that?
My sister's a complex soul and has a hard time letting love in. A lot of Afghan women that stand on their own 2 feet often have that very hard exterior. And when you're not taught delicacy, or you don't get to live in that nuance, it gets hard to come close to that. And in a sister relationship, there's incredible rivalries that come about, but this intergenerational chain of behavior finds its way back into this loving, wholesome dynamic and causes disruptions. And so in her chaos, at moments, I would feel absolutely appalled. I would never go back to her, no forgiveness. But like love, it unifies in the end. And so without much responsibility or too much of a discussion, sometimes a simple glance is enough for an apology to move forward. And so, I don't know if you have any daughters or you've had sister relationships in your life, but if you've seen them go at it, we can get incredibly passionate. And so this poem is more just a way to bring an ode and appreciation to that tumultuousness. I mean, sibling rivalries, there is nothing like it. The wars fought over other siblings and hatred. So
I have 5 sisters, so
Wow.
we could be on here for an hour talking about that relationship.
Yeah.
Let me just share a couple of thoughts about poetry, some quotes, and then I want to get your thoughts on what you think poetry is. It's been around for forever. I found a quote from Plato: "Poetry is nearer to vital truth than history." Another late great poet from England, Thomas Gray, said that when he was talking about his craft, poetry is thoughts that breathe and words that burn. How would you describe poetry?
I think the best poems are able to engage both a majestic component and a merciful component. And together, those two categories spring to life a tension that can only be resolved in poetry, this gray space where all questions and answers come from. I often live in that gray space, and being able to play flexibly with language packages pockets of life that I otherwise wouldn't be able to gift. Poetry is a weapon of war as much as it is the dessert after a long fast. The first poem I heard, my mother's voice. عشقاً عشقاً نرمری نرمری من. Back before I had known the names of things, my poem was a breath.
It's a magical component as well, which you just captured. Thank you so much. What a great interview.
Thank you so much for your time.